Good evening, folks. We're gonna give people a couple extra minutes because of the construction to navigate and figure out where we are, but thank you all for being here. We'll get started shortly. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Allison Alter, and I am proud to represent many of you on the Austin City Council as your District 10 representative and to serve as Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you. It's really nice to be with you in person. It's been a long time since we've been able to do a town hall in person, so I'm really pleased. And hello to those of you who are on our Facebook Live. Hopefully you can see us okay, and this will work out well doing both of these. Welcome to our town hall. This is an opportunity for you to learn more about how the city budget process works, what's included in the city budget, and to ask questions of me and city budget staff. During the Q&A portion of the evening, you'll have a chance to ask me questions, you'll have a chance to ask city budget staff questions, and for those of you joining Facebook Live, you're welcome to submit questions via the provided Google form, which I think is in the first comment. The run of show tonight, we're really honored to have Carrie Lang, who is our budget officer, who's going to provide a presentation on this year's budget presentation, and we'll take questions after I speak after Ms. Lang. I will share my thoughts on some of the budget process. Make sure that you're aware of a proposed affordable housing bond, which I want to get your feedback on, and then we'll take questions and answers. Before Ms. Lang presents, though, I want to make sure that you know who my staff are who are here. We have Kurt Kadena Mitchell, who I think is still out in the hall checking it, who's my chief of staff. And Kurt, one of our constituents, just told me how great you are, so I love hearing that. I do have the best staff on the hall. Nina Gadice, who's my budget director. Mina Shakarchi, who's my communications and outreach coordinator. Carrie Smith, who's the newest member of my staff, who's my executive assistant. She's the person you get if you call. And Melissa Markman, who works part-time and lives in the district and helps us with things. We are pleased tonight to have present our new EMS chief, Robert Luckritz, and assistant chief, Teresa Gardner. As I'll talk about later, EMS has been one of my focuses, and so I'm really pleased that you guys are with us tonight. Mr. Luckritz joined us as chief earlier this spring and is just trying to get to know folks around the community so he can better serve us. I also want to acknowledge that I have several people here who are on boards and commissions. If you are serving on a board and commission for me, if you could raise your hand. Thank you all for your service. Our boards and commissions are a wonderful opportunity to engage in the process, and we always like to work closely with our commissioners. And then finally, some of you may know the districts were redistricted, and I have some new members of my district. I don't know if anyone is newly in my district who's here. Well, if you are, welcome. We're happy to have you. I'm going to invite up Carrie Lang, who's going to give you a presentation of the city's budget. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. As Mayor Pro Tem said, I am Carrie Lang. I am the budget officer for the city in the Financial Services Department, and I am excited to be here with you all to talk about the proposed budget for fiscal year 23 that the city manager presented to council on July 15th. I do want to acknowledge also my staff who are here who have helped and prepare us for this presentation, as well as help throughout the budget process. We have Katie Stewart, who is one of our budget managers here, and Juan Preciado, who is one of our budget analysts. So I thank you all for being here and for your assistance during this process. I will go ahead and get started and kind of talk through the budget, and I usually start our conversations with a real conversation about the timeline. As I mentioned, the city manager presented his budget on July 15th, and we've had a few community engagement processes and are in the process of council deliberations. But this process really begins as early as January or February of every year, with the staff going to council and having conversation with council about their policy and what their focus is when we start thinking about the next fiscal year budget and the forecast period for the next 5 years. And then we go into, as well, boards and commissions recommendations, where we engage with our boards and commissions and ask them for their input on the budget and ask them to provide their recommendations by the end of March. We take that process very seriously, where we push those recommendations back to departments, ask them for their insight and input on those recommendations, and see which of those recommendations we can include in the proposed budget, as well as prepare that information for council to understand. Then we go into a forecasting period where we really start looking first at the revenue that we're projecting for the next year and how that revenue is projected to grow over 5 years, and what expenditures growth is looking like as far as our base expenditures, such as wage increases or contracts that we're already obligated to. So when we think about this process, we start several months in advance to kind of start laying the groundwork to get to where we are today with the proposed budget. The next steps, the council will continue to have conversations over the next couple of weeks, and then we'll be having the budget approval and deliberation and adoption on August 17th through 19th. So, when we look at the proposed budget and we look at the operating budget, it is for fiscal year 23 a $5 billion budget. And when you compare the city's budget to other jurisdictions or municipalities across the state, it looks a little bit different than other areas in that the city owns our utilities. And so when you look at this large budget, about 43% of that is our utilities, our Austin Energy and our Austin Water Department. We have other smaller utilities or smaller enterprises that are included in our budget, and that includes some enterprises that aren't often seen in city budgets, such as the airport, our aviation, which is 5% of the budget, our convention center, our Austin Resource Recovery that does our trash and recycle pickup, and then smaller enterprises such as Public Work and Transportation, our Watershed Protection Department, Code and Development Services. When you see that 8% that includes internal services, those are some of the functions that we have that help with the ongoing business of the city, but are more internally focused. So our fleet services department is included in that oversees all the vehicles and fleet that we have across the city. Our human resources and financial services department, as well as our building services that maintains, all the buildings that the city owns and works with our custodial and security services across the city. And then you think about the general fund, which is about 24% of the total budget when you look at our operating budget, and that's $1.3 billion. And so you look at, when we talk about the general fund, most of the conversation is focused on, the revenue that we have for the general fund, because it is so heavily relied on property taxes and sales tax. And so it's about 75% of our revenue source is through property or sales tax. And of course, as you know, the property taxes are our more stable, our stable revenue source that we can see that projected growth, and it's a trend that we can look at year over year. Sales tax is a little bit more volatile and is responsive to the economy. And so even though it's 27% of our overall budget, we really take a close look on how that is responding to the economy and the fluctuations that happen with sales tax. When you look at the other revenue sources for the general fund, we do receive a utility transfer from Austin Water and Austin Energy to support the general fund. And the other revenue that you see there is mainly things like franchise fees or fees for services, for example, for EMS fees for transport, or programmatic services from Parks and Recreation. Those are the kinds of services that you'll see are fines from municipal court. Those are included in the revenue of other sources for the general fund. When you look at the uses of funds for the general fund, there are 10 departments included in the general fund. The public safety departments, that's police, fire, and EMS, make up about 62% of our general fund. We have other safety outcome functions that are included in the general fund. That's municipal court and our newly created forensic science department. And then when you see our community services departments, about 24% of the total budget, that includes, public health, parks, our libraries, and animal services. And then finally, in the general fund, we have our housing department, which is about 2% of the fund. So those first two discussions was primarily on our operating budget. This slide right here really talks about our capital improvement program and our 5-year spending plan for that program. And when you see this information here, it's really focusing on how we are planning on spending our capital program over the next 5 years, broken out by our different outcome areas. In 2018, Council approved Strategic Direction 2023, which is the strategic plan for the city. And in that plan, the city was, the plan included 6 different outcome areas that we have operationalized our budget and our city around. And so when you see this slide here, it just shows the spending plan for, the capital spending plan for these outcome areas. And I'll talk a little bit about what those spending plans include. As you see, the mobility spending plan is the largest that we're looking at over the next 5 years. That's representative of the 2012, 2016, 2018, and 2020 voter-approved mobility bonds. And I'll speak a little bit more later about what those mobility bonds include. But that section also includes aviation's expansion. Aviation is going through some expansion out at the airport. So things like the baggage handling system, the Barbara Jordan terminal optimization. And then in fleet services, our fleet department is looking to increase electric charging infrastructure across the city to address our growing electrical fleet, as well as access to charging stations for the community. Then health and environment, that includes several department changes, including Austin Resource Recovery's investing over the next 5 years in their fleet and increasing their fleet technology, as well as increasing improving the fleet that they have with new replacements. Parks and Recreation has several rehab projects across the city, including 4 tennis center renovations, Barton Springs Bath House, and Givens District Pool renovations. And then government that works for all, which you can see in that gray area there. That includes investments in some of our more internal services or support services functions, so IT replacements, our human capital management systems, which better supports our workforce. And in the safety realm, which is the green section, that's primarily looking at the renovations that we're doing across the city for several EMS and fire stations. And then finally, the cultural and lifelong learning includes CIP planning and CIP spending for our Falk Building and Austin History Center, and the creation of the Cepeda Branch Trail, which is going to connect our Gold Valley neighborhood to the Cepeda Branch Library. So when the city manager proposed his budget on July 15th, the thing that he really talked about, the focus was on, was addressing our staff and the workforce for the city. And in that, we wanted to make sure that we were investing in our current staff and retention, as well as how we are able to recruit staff for the services that we provide. And so in that, the city manager proposed a budget that increases the living wage to $18 per hour. That is a 20% increase from the current year's living wage. And then beginning October 1st, if approved by council, it will be a 4% across the board increase for all of our civilian staff. This is something that is, the city manager has been very proud to present. This is the largest increase that we've been able to present and propose to our civilian staff over the last 20 years. And so this is one of the ways that we're looking at investing in our workforce as we move forward in fiscal year 23. The other item that was a top priority in council's conversations when we started these policy conversations back in January and February was addressing and mitigating climate change. And that area has a number of ongoing as well as new investments in addressing climate change, including a capital spending plan that's inclusive of $120.4 million to expand urban trails. That means increasing the number of off-street bike and pedestrian trails across the city. Austin Resource Recovery, again, is investing about $35 million in waste diversion services. There's capital spending to replace infrastructure, aging infrastructure at the Walnut Creek wastewater treatment plant. That's about $2.7 million in capital spending. And then our Office of Sustainability has $1 million in ongoing funding and a new position to help address the carbon footprint of Austin's food system. When we think about resilience and disaster preparedness, there are a number of new investments that are included in the proposed budget for this. 8 new positions and $2.2 million to improve the city's response to major catastrophic events. $1.2 million to support 2 additional shelter operations during the cold weather activation period. 9 new positions to support resiliency hubs and things like the city's efforts to coordinate mass care and temporary emergency shelters. And then as we look at strategic investments in the core infrastructure, this is another way that we're looking at investing in our workforce by investing and implementing $7 million of deferred maintenance projects and renovations to our existing facilities, as well as doing about $4.7 million of capital spending on generator and HVAC upgrades, as well as looking at facility security needs across the city. And then finally, the Public Safety Training Center is receiving funding to address some electrical and plumbing deficiencies. And as you may know, the Public Safety Training Center houses all 3 of our public safety departments' academies. And so we want to make sure that we're providing the ongoing infrastructure and maintenance that's needed to keep that training facility available. Another look at our proposed budget, and this slide, the next couple of slides, takes a look at our proposed budget across our different outcomes that I mentioned earlier. And so when you look at these outcome areas that are included in our strategic plan, we really use the plan to generate and to talk about how we are going to invest in the city going forward. The hotel occupancy tax has seen rebounding collections, and so the revenue generated for that will continue to invest in our cultural arts, historic preservation, and live music base, and those funds that help the city of Austin's cultural base. We have 7 new positions in our Austin Public Library system. We have a passport services that is already existing, but we're expanding those services with these 7 new positions. In economic opportunity and affordability, we continue to work on addressing the affordable housing goals set forth by the Austin Strategic Housing Blueprint with $79.1 million of planned capital spending. And then this one-time funding that you see here is $5 million of one-time funding for emergency rental assistance. In mobility, and I kind of mentioned, and you saw the large blue area for capital spending for mobility, that does include $269.2 million in planned spending and 21 new positions for the mobility projects that have been voter approved. Some of those projects include things like Burnett Road corridor projects, airport, Slaughter Lane, North Lamar corridor, as well as South Lamar, as well as some intersection improvements and bikeways, including Vision Zero implementation for this mobility bond implementation. And then finally, in mobility, there is the sidewalk plan that has been approved. And so this is rehabilitating and building new sidewalks across the city that has been identified through our Public Works and Transportation departments. In government that works for all, we are increasing our positions and our funding for our language access program. We're adding one new position, as well as the ongoing investment of $1.6 million for that program. In our city clerk's office, we are adding 3 new positions to support our boards and commissions. And then within the safety outcome, there is the one-time funding of $1 million to establish the Trauma Recovery Center, as well as the creation, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, the creation of the new Forensic Science Department. That is $13.1 million for that department. It was an existing service within APD and within Austin Police Department. We've separated out as a new department and added 3 new positions to them to improve our crime scene processing, as well as evidence collection quality assurance. And then finally, in health and environment, we have capital spending that is going to support the construction of the Dove Springs Public Health Center, which includes things like a neighborhood center, a WIC center, child care, and immunization clinic for that area of the city, as well as a $4.8 million investment in homelessness encampment cleanups. And then finally, we have added investments in our animal shelter at the Austin Animal Center, 4 new positions to improve process and claimings in our customer service area. And then immigrant legal services is receiving about $900,000 in fiscal year 23, which is a small increase from what we've presented or what we've been able to invest in the previous years. So this slide, we have named the chart within the city to talk about what these investments and what ongoing investments look like as far as how that will impact us for the next 1 to 5 years. The city manager, of course, presented a balanced budget for fiscal year 23 in our proposal, but as we look at the growth rate of our revenue compared to the growth of our expenditures year over year, this is the first year in several years that we have been able to show this chart where the next fiscal year isn't showing a deficit compared to the revenue growth versus the expenditure growth. Now, in this, there is base expenditure. So when you think about the increases that you see year over year, this includes base expenditures such as, again, wage increases, any insurance, health insurance increases that we have, contractual increases that we're obligated to increase year over year. Those are the kind of base increases that you'll see in this forecast period. In the out years, starting in fiscal year 25, there is some increase for additional police officers beginning in 25 based on their proposed staffing plan. But when we see this chart, the thing that I think we need to really look at is even though we're seeing a small nominal surplus year over year, when we look at that out year, we do see a small deficit that we're projecting for fiscal year 27. And what that tells us is, although year over year we're seeing that there are some surpluses, our expenditure growth overall is still outpacing our revenue growth when we look at how the ongoing costs and increases that we're having will impact us going forward. This $8.9 million deficit, we think of that more as a nominal deficit. When we look at a $1.4 billion budget overall, we think that we'll continue to look at how we can contain our expenditures year over year and look at areas where we can try to increase our revenue to offset that amount. So what does all of this mean to the typical ratepayer and homeowner? We always show this chart, this impact statement, to really show what these increases and what these changes mean year over year for the typical ratepayer. And when we identify the typical ratepayer, it is a homestead assessed at about $448,000. But when you look at these rates and fees, so we try to take a holistic look of what our enterprise departments are doing, the fees that they've created, as well as what the property tax bill will look like. Now, you'll notice that the Austin Energy increase is listed here based on their initial proposed rate increase. They are continuing to go through their rate case hearing, and so this was a snapshot in time of what their proposed increase was during the proposed budget, but they'll continue to have conversations with council over the next several months to come with a final rate that is approved by council by mid-November, I believe is the timeline for that rate to be finalized. And so that will have some impact and change on what this chart ultimately looks like after the proposed budget. When you look at the other rates and fees that we have here, there is a rate increase for the Austin Resource Recovery for their 64-gallon cart. And then there are some increases in our clean community fee as well as our transportation user fee. But when you look at your property tax bill and how that compares to this fiscal year, you'll see a decrease in your property tax bill as a homestead when compared to this year. But when you look at all of this overall and how this overall impacts you as a typical homeowner, it's about a 2.7% increase in compared to this current fiscal year. That's $120 a year, which is about $10.06 a month. Again, I want to kind of just talk through what this timeline looks like. We've had our community input sessions. We had the second one on this past Tuesday, but there's still opportunity for you to talk to the council members, to talk to Mayor Pro Tem, to talk to the council as a whole, and to provide your input and your input back on the proposed budget. And then council will deliberate again on August 17th through 19th to approve the proposed budget that will go into place on October 1st. Thank you so much. Okay.
With the Facebook Live, we'll have to kind of be a little more formal. Okay. Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Lang. It was, I think, super useful for us to get that overview and that snapshot. Just before I talk a little bit about my approach to budget and some of the things that I'm focused on, I want to make sure that you know how you can provide feedback beyond tonight and some additional opportunities that we have to engage in the budget process. I think you guys may need to change some slides down there. Mina, do you need to change the slide? So we have our council budget work sessions on August 9th and 11th. You can tune into ATXN if you want to hear what we're talking about. Then we'll have the budget deliberations, as Ms. Lang said, on August 17th. You can get further information on the budget process by looking at the council budget questions, which I think are linkable from Speak Up Austin. You can also see the Austin City Council's message board, which is just austincouncilforum.org. I am also going to be hosting budget office hours 2 times next week. These will be an opportunity to talk about the budget and the housing bond, and if you show up and you want to talk about something else, we'll be happy to engage with you. So Monday, August 8th at Rudy's on Lamar at 12 p.m. and next Wednesday, August 10th at Galaxy Cafe on Mesa at 5 p.m. We'll have more details in social media and the newsletter, but I think you have the basic information behind here. You also can continue to fill out the form that we shared or write us at district10@austintexas.gov if you like. This binder down here is the 900+ page budget, which there's also a lot of information that's online in addition to that. Just so you have a sense of the size of the budget and what we are looking at from an overview perspective. For me, I want to talk a little bit about what I'm focused on. And for me, I'm really focused first and foremost on delivering our basic services well and making sure that we're keeping Austinites safe. To that end, I'm prioritizing investments in supporting Austin's workforce, so our civilian and our sworn staff within the city. Everyone knows that it's a challenge right now to hire and keep workers, and the city is an organization with 14,000 workers, and we are no exception. And it's challenging for people, particularly if they're making the lowest wage we offer, to be able to live in our city. And so we as a council and me personally, we have prioritized trying to make headway on this, and we still have some work to do. I'm also interested in programs that we have to support our workforce to make sure that we have the people to hire within our community that we need to meet our needs. I want to make sure that we are addressing our critical needs that have been identified in our after-action reports from Storm Uri and the water boil notice. Those are really important in building our resilience. I'm focused on improving the EMS billing system, and I'm focused on that because I think there is a huge amount of revenue that we are not taking in, that if we improved our systems, we could then deploy to invest in our EMS system and in our EMS professionals. And I want to acknowledge Selena Shia, who is the MSA Association President, and I already acknowledged Chief Luckritz and Assistant Chief as well, who are here. EMS is something that I believe that if you are in District 10 of our public safety organizations, it is EMS that is the organization that most matters for your safety, given what we see about different statistics. And so I've been really focused on improving our EMS, getting additional folks, making sure the training's happening, as well as supplementing that with the Office of Chief Medical Officer and the Paramedic Practitioners Program that I helped launch. The other issue for safety in District 10 that's really important is wildfire prevention. So I'm watching that very closely, making sure that our new firehouse in Davenport that's under construction has all of it's a fire EMS house, making sure that it has all the funding it needs for construction and the staffing once that's done during this fiscal year. We're in the Jewish Community Center, so I'm also focused on fighting hate and anti-Semitism in our community, given the events that we've seen. I guess yesterday was 3 years since El Paso. We've been really trying to move forward with efforts to prevent gun violence and just prevent violence in general. Also working to make sure that we are improving our sexual assault response system, and have been working hard on that. I'm also a parks person. Some of you know me as the parks lady. And so I'm making sure that we are investing in our parks and our green spaces. And I want to acknowledge District 10 resident Liana Kalikova, who is also Assistant Director from Parks, who is here. So if you have parks questions, you can maybe ask her if she's willing. I don't know that she's here on her city with her city hat. And then I really want to make sure that we are ensuring that our climate plan gets implemented. This is the plan that we have to get us to net zero by 2040. And then I know that, when I talk about basic services, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about our airport and our utilities and making sure that they can meet the needs we have in a growing city. I also chair the Audit and Finance Committee, so there are some things that I'm focused on that are a little less sexy and other people may not be paying attention, but I think they're really important for our city to function. So I am working really hard on our cybersecurity practices, on our internal review and project management capabilities, and the stewardship of city assets like our properties and our strategies about owning versus leasing. We continue, my staff and I, to review this 900-plus document here. So we don't have it all memorized. We are working on some amendments and some budget riders, which is direction that goes with the budget over the course of the year. And those we will post to the City Council message board when they're ready. And again, that's at austincouncilforum.org. I want to, before I take questions, though, point out one thing, which has also been something I've spent a lot of time on, which is school finance reform. So you guys all saw that we get about $605 million in property taxes that fund our city. How much do you think we're sending to the state to fund schools outside of Austin? So it's going to be about $800 million. So when you look at your tax bill, and that's on top of what the $800 million-ish that you spend for AISD. So we are now sending to the state to fund students elsewhere as much as we spend through our school district on students, or more than what we spend on students in our district. So when you take a look at your tax bill and you say, oh, my taxes are going up and everything, please keep in mind that your taxes are going up first and foremost because the state is not funding our schools. And it is super important to recognize that and to keep that in context. I understand that people's budgets are tight, but the city is keeping our budget as tight as we can, given all the inflation, all the cost drivers, the need to keep folks employed. It costs money to get our ARR drivers to drive when they can go work for Amazon and do other things. And we've had to add to our budget to be able to do that. It will take money for us to retain our EMS professionals so they don't go work for the hospitals. And we have all of the cost drivers for commodities, and all of our contractors are facing those kinds of things. So as you look at this, and I realize that in my district, you're not the average house. You're going to be double that in most cases in terms of what your house value is. But nonetheless, the amount of taxes that you are sending to the state because they're not funding our schools, and they have a $27 billion surplus, that's a really key way of understanding what is going on with your overall tax bill when you do look at that. Because often the city's the one you think is doing everything, but you're actually being taxed for a lot of other governmental entities. So I look forward to hearing from you. I'm going to invite Ms. Lang to come up because she may be able to answer some of the questions. And we are trying to be online as well as in person. And so it does mean that we can't be quite as informal as we would like and roam around as much as possible. Please raise your hand if you have a question or comment, and we'll come around with the speaker. If you could say your name and maybe where you live, that would be great. If you're not comfortable speaking up and you want to ask a question via note card, I think my staff has some note cards, and we can do that. And as part of this question and answer period, though, before you raise your hands, I want to talk about the housing bond. So give me one more second. I want to get your input tonight or office hours, et cetera, about the housing bond. And I'm sorry I had you come up too early, but there was a housing bond, that affordable housing bond, that was proposed by some of my colleagues. It's a two-step process, so they have to ask the city manager to prepare the materials for that, and then it has to come back for us to vote again to put it on the ballot. This is a affordable housing bond that they ultimately settled on $350 for the material that will come back to us. They can still change that. I abstained from supporting it on the July 28th vote because I wanted to hear from my constituents. I was not comfortable making a decision of that magnitude where there hadn't been broad discussion in the community, and certainly not where I hadn't broached it with my community to understand how people thought about it. It won't pass ultimately unless it's actually passed on the ballot and you would get a chance to vote on it. But I did think it was important. So I want to just really quickly go over what we know about that bond in terms of its implications. So originally, the sponsors of that bond put forward a $300 million proposition, which would have been a little bit over a 1 cent increase to the debt service portion of the tax and have an annual impact of about $40. That's on that $450,000 house with the homestead. On the day of the vote, it was amended to be $350 million, which would have an estimated annual impact of $46.59. That is for that typical homeowner of a $448,000 home with a homestead with a taxable value of $358,400 net of the homestead exemption. So figure whatever this number is, for many of you, it's going to be double of that if you're living in District 10. If you have that higher home value, obviously it's going to be higher. We have some information in a memo. Mostly this is what the memo tells you about what will happen and how that interacts with other tax rate increases on the debt that are already in the motion because of voter-backed bond debt that you already voted for. We also have some copies of a impact statement that was produced by some of the housing advocates that will tell you a little bit about the economic impact of the bonds that we have already invested. One of the things that's important as we assess whether we should move forward with a bond is to recall that in 2018, voters voted for a $250 million bond, And by the end of this fiscal year, 90% of that bond will be spent or obligated. And one of the ways that we make affordable housing happen is by the public sector investing and leveraging other funds as well. Again, I abstain from this because I want to hear from you. I want to hear from you tonight, and I want to hear from you in the office hours or whatever, how you feel about this. Ideally, we're doing a bond process that's much broader, that takes into consideration lots of other needs. We've moved away from that process, but I do think it's important to get your input if we're going to have a conversation about putting something of that magnitude, no matter how needed it may be and how important the issue is. My responsibility as your representative. So now I will take questions with Ms. Lang. And Kirk Candena Mitchell you have a couple questions? Okay.
So we're going to
Come
start.
over here for the.
Well, I was telling you. We have 2 questions so far that were submitted online. So just as a reminder for anyone listening, you can submit online. Anyone can put a note card in the basket, and then I'll come around with the mic. But let's start with these 2.
Okay. The first online question is, what is the reasoning and benchmarking done for increasing staff salaries? Increased salaries do not correlate with affordability. These individuals working at $18 still cannot afford to live in Austin. What are the efforts being taken to allow for low-income earners to live within the city limits? Do you want to take that or you want me to? What? Okay. Okay, so in June, as a council, we passed a resolution to prioritize increasing the living wage, which is currently $15 an hour. We asked the city manager to come back with a budget that would move us towards $22 an hour by, and further by 2027, and to do as much as he could this year. Within the confines of the budget and the proposed budget, $18 was where the city manager landed, where he thought he could get us to this year. And I will just say that $3 as an increase is much higher than we've ever managed to do before. So while it may not be enough for all of our employees, it is moving in the right direction and at a pace that we have not seen before. It is still difficult for somebody who is the only breadwinner making $18 an hour to live in our city. We have within the budget, we have several mechanisms that we've highlighted. One is some investment in rental assistance. We have programs that we're working on with anti-displacement. We have our affordable housing dollars. We have our workforce programs that allow somebody to train and earn more. There are many other ways in which, we've invested in childcare and other things as well. Carrie, do you want to add anything?
Yes, and the city manager, as Mayor Pro Tem has said, the investments that we looked at and how we can move forward is really one of the steps that the city manager wanted to focus on in this proposed budget. Staff has also responded to some of council's inquiries about what increasing that living wage beyond $18 would mean for the general fund and for the city as a whole. And so I think there's an opportunity for continued conversation for the council and for staff to try to make sure that the council understands, what those changes mean year over year as they deliberate and decide what the next steps will be for us as a city in addressing the need to retain and recruit. As Mayor Pro Tem said, the challenges that we're seeing in the different departments and the different service levels and the different types of jobs that we offer, and trying to make sure we have the ability to recruit and keep those service and that workforce available in the city to provide the services that we're working really hard to provide.
Thank you. And we also, for those workers, there are some departments that we are doing cost of study and market studies, and we are adjusting those separately. I've been involved in that for our 911 workers and our victim services, and with our ARR trucks. Those were things that I set in motion last year in the budget, and some of those adjustments have been made and are in motion. The other question from online, and then I'll take in person, is in the new budget, how will the police budget change after inflation? So the police budget, it's not the most straightforward this year to understand, so I'll tell you a little bit what I can say. From just what's in the budget, it's about $1 million more than it was last year. And you have forensics was moved out, which is roughly 13 million. And then we had moved some of the financial staff into the financial services, but it was a transfer, but those people are moving back into APD. That additional amount with that million includes money that I helped work on to shore up their retirement system. So we passed through the legislature last session a way to shore up the police retirement system, and we have to make some extra payments for that than we normally do. That's in there. There are a number of civilian staff that are getting the $18 who were lower, and there are 4% increases for staff as well that are part of that. It is complicated, though, because it doesn't include the money for the contract, which is somewhere else. So right now, where we are at this point, it's $1 million more. And for those who are concerned about putting too much into the police budget, there is a question that I have, because we're not allowed to decrease the police budget once we've increased it, of what happens with that money, with the contract, even as I want to make sure that we are paying our police appropriately. There are some questions that I'm working on figuring out with respect to that. Anything to add? No. Okay. All right. So Kurt, do you want to? Okay. If you could please state your name. If you could please state your name and give your question, that would be great.
Susan Ogden.
Okay.
Hi, thanks, hi. So, I'm a landlady, and
Susan, if you wouldn't mind holding a little closer so people online can hear you, that would be great.
I'm a landlady, and all of my property, most of it is in your district, so I can imagine that you know just how bad it is out there. And I'm being forced to sell some of it. But in my way of doing my own financing, I have to guess, January 1, I'm like, okay, at least a 10% increase in what my taxes were from last year. So I start saving and saving. And this year, when I found out about when the values came in, they were so horrible. and so I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. They were really, really bad this year. So I thought, well, of course, everybody's going to go down. And so I started saving based on a guess of 2%. And, so I'm hearing from Save Austin now that y'all are asking for the maximum property tax rate increase allowed by law for both residential and commercial properties. And I guess I'm wondering what the new revenue rate would be and what the proposed tax rate for this year is.
So I'm going to let Ms. Lang answer that for the specifics on the numbers, but just want to point out that these numbers are us telling you what happens if you have a homestead. So if you have commercial property, the impacts are different. We also had a freeze last year on our appraisal values that is flipped this year, and so you're getting a bigger bang with respect to the appraised value. And if you don't have the homestead protecting you, it is a much bigger impact. I'm going to let Ms. Lang answer the other part.
So the proposed, the maximum tax rate that the council approved for setting the maximum tax rate, that doesn't mean that that's the tax rate that they're going to approve when they do the budget deliberations. But that was 46.27 cents valuation. The no new tax rate, I believe, is 43.35 cents. 4538, 45.35 cents per $100 valuation.
So last year it was 0.541. So are you saying that it's actually going down?
Yes, it went down because when you look at the assessed value of your homestead, that growth is offset by the increased value of the other properties that are in the jurisdiction. So your commercial property actually is probably what you're seeing increasing in. The homestead is will show a decrease year over year when you're looking at your property taxes.
But my question and my panic is that that is not my problem. My problem is these rental properties. And so I'm just asking you, can you please give me the proposed tax rate for residential properties disregarding homestead?
The proposed tax rate across all properties is 46.27.
Okay, so it was 0.541 last year, sir. It's gone down.
It's gone down.
Thank you.
Before the next question, would it be helpful to just explain how the rate can go down, but if your value is different, that's why you may see a differential? That might be part of what the confusion is.
You got it? Okay.
But you're not calculating your increased value on the old tax rate. It is a lower tax rate. So that should help at least on your calculations of that. Right. Great. Yeah.
Hi, Russell Artman from Great Hills. So I've noticed, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, and especially as I increased my number of rental units specifically towards people experiencing homelessness, the police are very, very slow to respond, if they're responding at all. And I'm not talking about minor crimes. I'm talking about assaults that are both physical and then sexual. They graduate to narcotic trafficking, now into methamphetamine, and now it's also prostitution. I've spoken to at least 10 police officers. I've spoken to prosecutors, and they simply said the police are not going to enforce those laws at all. The DA is not prosecuting them, so they're not going to arrest them. And this is leading to an incredible increase in crime. I spent about an hour and a half yesterday on the phone with ECHO and service providers talking about extensively my properties and the increased crime there, where service providers aren't comfortable going there, and the police aren't responding. Now I'm left with housing people who are committing crimes, and I have no repercussion, I have no recourse. So this is getting worse and worse. When I've spoken to police officers, they've also said they're incredibly understaffed. So I can't even pay police officers in their off-duty time to spend time at my properties and spend extra money that I didn't budget for to try and help because they're so understaffed and other people are doing the same thing. So when I hear there's only $1 million more for police, that doesn't seem sufficient. Right? What I expected to hear today was we're increasing police salaries by 15% so we can compete better with Round Rock and Georgetown, where the police are earning more money and have better benefits. So I'm expecting to hear different stories about the police. So please help me understand how we're going to address this completely understaffed police department and how we're going to get that back on track, please.
Thank you. And Russ, let me just remind you that when I talked about the million, I said it doesn't include the money that is set aside for their contract, which is where their raises are coming. We're in the process of negotiating the contract, and so it doesn't include raises and other things because that's in a separate pot of money. So that piece of it is there. We are working to have more officers in the academy and making sure that that academy is run well so that those officers, when they get on the street, they can serve our community. That is one thing. One of the things that, I'd like to have a conversation with you about the specifics, because I've been through this circus several times with officers saying the DA is not doing something or other, and we've run the traps and gone and talked to the DA. And while that is often a nice story for certain crimes, that's not actually what's happening. And so one of the things we've been doing is working with APD on that to make sure that their officers are aware of what is actually going on. Now, the DAs, I'm not going to make excuses for the DA or the county attorney, But there is a certain portion of this that is, they only have so many resources. They could never do every crime, prosecute every crime, from misdemeanor on up, and they're having to make choices to focus on the most violent. And that is having some impact backwards, but it's not clear when you actually go and you say, okay, show me the cases and show me where it is. I'm not finding, I've done this a couple times, and we're not actually seeing that line of logic is what we're seeing in fact. So that's a dynamic that needs to be fixed between the DA's office and APD. We have been talking about it a little bit with them directly with gun violence. We had a gun violence summit and brought folks together. The shortages within APD, there are a lot of different causes for that, and we had a huge class 20-some years ago. Now they get to all retire with their wonderful benefits. It's been rough to be a police officer. The process we've been going in as a community, the salaries that they can get elsewhere, et cetera. This is a problem, although we like to think that Austin is unique, it is a problem that other entities or sheriff's office, et cetera. For the specific issues, I would have to know, more about the specifics to see what the solutions are, and we can certainly have a conversation and see if we can bring some folks together with you. It is a challenge that we are working through, but adding more officers before we can get the people that we already have positions for through the academy doesn't solve the problem either, because you still have to train them. At this point in time, we have people who want to go into the academy, and we need the chief to work out how you would approach adding more to the academy. And I would say that the shortage in EMS is actually greater than APD in terms of the staffing shortages. And, a lot of that has to do with the dynamics, and we have to be paying more for our EMS. Our police professionals need to be paid more than they are, but let's be realistic that they are the top paid in the state, too.
They may be top paid, but they're not commensurate with other neighboring districts and neighboring areas. So they can easily live in the Austin area and still earn more money.
That is not necessarily the data that I'm shown. That may. I haven't seen the latest thing from our contract negotiator, so I can't add more. Sure.
Over 50 phone calls to the APD officer in charge of various districts, and they either never pick up or never call back, or they don't send police when I'm begging them on 911 calls, and I'm begging them in calls directly to the
Okay. Well, I think let's talk about it with the specific. One of the things that I found is that we have to have the specific answers.
I just want to underscore, if anyone, so not just specific to you, if you are ever making a call to any department and not getting a response from any department, APD or otherwise, 911 or otherwise, please contact us and tell us, because I can't do anything unless I know. And very often, in various settings, we get very anecdotal or secondhand information. So I'll get contacted by someone who says, I saw on Nextdoor, my neighbor said they made this call and they didn't get a call back. And I can't really do anything about that because I don't know when was the call made, what number did they call, et cetera. So if you ever experience that with any city department, email our office. If you ever see on a neighborhood listserv or anything like that that you're experiencing that, tell them to directly contact our office. And then we'll take more live questions. I just want to hand, and at some point, let's take a couple of more questions from online.
He just said he was handing it to me so that I had it. He was just handing it to me so that I had it, so we could ask them. Thank you, Kurt. Go ahead, Nina.
Williams, Great Hills. I had a question about the revenue side, but I want to support my fellow Great Hills resident in saying that I think this problem has been exacerbated, if not caused, by the city council, by first inviting masses of homeless people to the city and then not responding to what the citizens have wanted and have voted for in dealing with the problem, and also slashing the police budget at the same time. Now, to my question, concerning property taxes, as everyone knows, all of our valuations, our assessed market values by the TCAD have vastly been increased. I didn't quite understand the first question and the first answer, but I will tell you that I, as someone with a homeowner's exemption, with a senior exemption, I've been told, I've got all my conversations on tape with TCAD, that the taxes I actually pay will increase 10% every year. Now that's someone with both exemptions. People without those exemptions will be increased more. If houses are sold with a turnover, then the market value will reassess and that will go up more. Meanwhile, the state legislature enacted a measure saying that no jurisdiction should have an increase in revenue from property taxes more than 3.5% year over year. So that's obviously being violated, and I'd like to hear your comments about that.
So I think what TCAD said is that if you have the homestead, your assessed value can't go up more than 10% a year, and then your taxes are imposed on what your assessed value is.
The market value as determined by TCAD had nothing to do with my exemptions. I was told that the taxes I actually pay will go up 10% a year.
Well, I can't speak for every other taxing entity, but by our calculations, at least the assessed rate on that amount, if you only go up 10%, your rate is going, even if we had the same rate, it was only going up that much more, on that much more of it. I understand that, but I don't have all of the data on all of the other entities and what they're doing. We are not increasing the tax rate. We reduced the tax rate.
Yeah, but that's irrelevant. You can increase the valuation.
But your valuation is only going up 10%. So when you do the calculations, it doesn't necessarily go up.
It's irrelevant what the rate is when you can increase the valuation, the state valuation is what you want.
But you can't, because you only can go up 10% on your homestead. Her question was with it on the commercial, where that doesn't happen, and that's why there's a variation of it. I know, but it's not a homestead. I'm sorry. I'm talking about non-resident. Well, no, residential. That's not a homestead. I was lumping that in there in my use of commercial. Technically, I may have been wrong, but thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Christy McKenzie, and I'm in Deep Eddy. I have a couple of things. So I completely support your three most important things that are on your agenda. Supporting Austin workforce. In medicine, we're having the same problems you guys are having. We can't recruit, we can't retain. But you guys are making that more difficult because you guys, City Council, when you vote to maximize the tax rate and increase all of those budgets, you make it more difficult for us to recruit anybody. We're losing nurses, techs, across the board. Okay, so when you come to the hospital and you sit in the ER for 6 hours, you might be waiting for someone to clean your room. When your delivery is delayed, it might be because we don't have enough nurses. We have the room, we don't have a nurse. You are making the affordability crisis worse by making it more expensive to live here across the board. All of our electric bills have gone through the roof. Our taxes are insane. We can't recruit physicians now. I mean, it's across the board. So when you guys are sitting in the ER, you keep that in mind when you vote for these bonds, when you support an increased cost of living for Austin. I totally agree. $18 an hour at the rate you guys are increasing, the cost of living here, that's not going to go anywhere. That's not going to cover anything. You guys are really inefficient at making it more affordable. You have $5 million for a one-time emergency rental assistance help. One time. Okay, so they can stay for 1 month and then they've got to leave. Landlords can't keep their properties. They can't keep paying those taxes because they're not allowed to evict anybody. They're not allowed to raise their rent. So it would be nice for us to work on a budget that is not going to exceed our revenue, which is not happening. You guys have record revenue from property taxes. If my income was less than my projected expenses, that means I'd have to spend less, and you guys should too. You really should. That brings me to the next thing, education. The Robin Hood laws that you're talking about, sending our money to the state of Texas for education, I am all for that because at least it's going to education. You guys have $1.6 million for homeless encampment cleanups. That's not happening. It's not happening. Why isn't it happening? Why aren't you guys cleaning up these encampments? You've got $1.6 million, but now you want 4, a nominal increase to 4, but you're not doing the job at 1.6. These encampments are growing. Safety is one of your priorities. I think that's amazing. You have a 4% wage increase for civilian workforce, $18 an hour. You gave EMS 14 cents. You gave them a 14-cent raise.
We haven't actually given them any raise yet because we don't have the contract, but.
That's wild to me. EMS acts as our social workers. They show up when the police used to. Now it's EMS. Domestic violence, mental health exacerbations, these psychotic episodes we're seeing on the news, that's our EMS workers out there. And then your commitment to the parks, I think is amazing as well. But you got to clean up the encampments. It doesn't matter how many trails we have if you can't bike down the trail because you've got tents and needles and feces. You got to clean up these encampments. And I'd like to see more of a commitment for affordability from the standpoint of we're not going to make this worse. We're not going to make this worse for you. We want you to be able to recruit the nurses to staff your hospital. And you can't do it at the rate you guys are raising our tax rates, maximizing them. If it hadn't been for the state of Texas, what was the increase? Right now it's 3.5%. What would it have been this year? 8. It was 8 before the state capped you at 3.5. And I have no doubt that you guys would have asked for an 8% increase. Please don't abstain. Please vote against this housing bond. Please oppose it. We can't afford it. And we can't recruit people here. We can't bring people here.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. I appreciate that. I want to comment on a couple of things that just provide some other ways for you to engage and share your voice. The biggest increase in terms of the fees on there is Austin Energy. And that is not decided. We are going through a rate case. We have a individual homeowner customer advocate that is part of the process. I think it's already come down from what it's in there, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know what came down, but it's already down from there. But that is a process that you can engage in for the part that is the largest increase in there. So I want to make sure that you're aware of that. On the homeless encampments, if there are particular areas where they're not cleaning up, again, that is something you can reach out to our office and we can talk with you about it. It can't be like on next door that X, Y, and Z is going on. We have to have someone that we are interacting with, that we can, go out and look at the place and try to engage resources. I will remind you that I did not vote to lift the camping ban. There was no plan for it. And we are still living with the consequences. And we have spent countless hours and millions of dollars. And it bothers me that we have to spend money on camp cleanup, which doesn't help anyone, get off the street, doesn't do any of that. So these are complicated issues, and how we got here is complicated. But I hear you. I share the frustrations. Liana knows we've had many conversations about our parks and the encampments and the impacts that it's having. These are people, though, and we have, we're trying to figure out how we can do better. But I appreciate your honesty, and that's what this forum is for you to be able to share your thoughts and your concerns. So I appreciate you doing that and doing it so eloquently. Amy, and then I'm going to take one of these. Please use the microphone so the people online can hear you. We are trying to do this both ways.
Amy Mark. I've been in this district, for almost 30, 35 years. Well, we live in Austin since 1983. I have never experienced such heat, this time. We started to have 3 digits degree in May, and I don't think it's going to change, shortly because of the climate change and all that. So I would like to have the city to really consider to put focus on public health in regard to heat. Because when I'm driving around in District 10 and I saw all these little children riding their bike and all of that, I don't see any water station anywhere. And there needs to be a public PSA to let people know the danger of heat strokes. And I think it needs to be put in focus. So that is so important. I would like for the city to consider, adding a position to just address heat. So I guess I'm not going to be popular because I'm adding more to the budget. So in regard to the homeless, it's not just shelter, we all know. You have drug addiction, you have mental health. If you walk down Trinity Street, the homeless, they have their own community. So I think we need to have a comprehensive, root cause assessment of how do we deal with our folks who are living in our community. I thank you for your work. I'm all for affordable housing bond because faculty member at UT in computer science, I'm not talking about humanity department, they cannot afford to live in Austin. So how are we going to address that? And then we are using our tax dollar to pay our EMS, police, teachers, and they cannot afford to live in Austin. So our tax dollars is going out to other county to pay their property tax. So that needs to be addressed. Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you. On the heat, I just want to acknowledge that we do have a chief resilience officer that was in last year's budget who's now working on some of these questions. Heat would be one of the issues that she would be focused on. We have been trying to think and brainstorm in our office how we address heat and heat island effects, et cetera. And then we have had a campaign related, there is a public health campaign with information about heat. You may not have seen it, it might not be effective enough, but there is some PSA information on that available to the community. And thank you, Amy, for your service on the Arts Commission. Appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going to ask one of these, and then we'll take Linda. Did you have any? Sorry. These seem to be me. Are we going to fund additional efforts to prevent wildfire and related threats? So the budget has about, I think, $15 million related to wildfire. This year, there are additional people who will be staffing the fire marshal's office. Those are going to be paid out of developer fees. That is going to help us to implement our wildland urban interface code. And then we are making investments. They're not necessarily additional money. So we have launched a wildfire battalion, which includes several firehouses in our district. We are in the process of training all of our firefighters in the Responding to Interface program. We are working to see what we can do with respect to evacuation routes. We have a lot of firefighters right now, given all of the wildfires, who are getting that experience, which is super important. There may be additional investments in Austin Energy for vegetation management, which is something that I've been working on a lot. We don't have that question back from the budget office yet, so I don't know if there's additional dollars this year in that. Many of the circuits in our district have been covered for that vegetation management, so that reduces the risk for wildfire. And Austin Water is making some investments in wildfire. I think we've asked some questions about that in the budget. So whoever asked that question, if you look at the budget questions, there'll be a lot more detailed information coming on what's being spent this year for wildfire prevention. It is really a real issue. And before I forget, because monkeypox is the next thing that we have to worry about, there is a roundtable tomorrow from 12 to 1 that's virtual. My staff can try to help you find that if you're interested in that. That just came out, that I just saw, that was going on tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah. Linda, did you?
I was going to ask about the wildfire because development in the WUI is just everywhere. I mean, trees are going down, and we're all really scared about wildfire. And I really appreciate the efforts. I'd like to respond and say there was a 45-acre area, and our neighbors discovered a homeless camp on it. And what was terrifying is they had heating elements for cooking and things like that in a wildfire area. And honestly, we called Allison's office, and in 24 hours, they were gone. And the owner was involved. We communicated the information. So everything's not perfect, but it worked. So.
Thank you, Linda. You're welcome. Dale?
Thank you for giving us this opportunity. I'm Dale Beulah, live in Jester, not the dorm, Jester Estates. If we think it's hot now, just wait for 10 years. Scientists have been telling this since the 80s that this is going to happen. The predictions are that we'll average 100 triple-digit days within the next decade. So we have neighbors now that cannot walk their dogs because the streets are so hot it burns their feet. So a couple of suggestions. They're still pouring black asphalt in this city. Black asphalt. It is 180 degrees when the sun is shining on that street. So I've sent you a couple of emails about this for what Arizona is doing. Now instead of putting a coating over the streets, they put a coating that is light colored that actually reflects the heat. They've lowered neighborhood temperatures by 15 to 20 degrees because of the reflective quality. I just don't see any point in pouring black tar when we have alternatives that we could use. So I could talk to you all day about climate. You know I'm a weird climate person, but keep up the good work on electrification of vehicles. The city has just barely scratched the surface on the zero-emission vehicles. I just read this week that the European Union is requiring all commercial buildings to be no cooler than 80 degrees in the summertime. We still go to theaters and restaurants where you have to wear coats. It's absurd. We're wasting millions of kilowatts of energy, but I don't want to get on my soapbox because I'll be here for a long time. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Dale, for all your advocacy on the climate, and I did note your emails, and we will be looking at that as part of what we want to do about heat. I think it's a really interesting idea to see whether that can happen within the budgets that we have.
Moved to Austin, we noticed in the rural areas when they would pave the road, they would put like limestone dust on top of the tar because limestone is kind of a cream colored, and all the rural roads were that way, and now all the rural roads are black. I guess they're saving a nickel or a dime. I don't know what they're saving.
That's certainly a conversation we can have with the Public Works Director and see. I'm sure that they're already thinking about it. So, great. I think this gentleman over here and then over here.
While we're doing that, I have more on the, just in case anyone else is interested in that. We have, Dale, we have raised that, and the answer's not great, but in case anyone else is interested in it, we have a contract for that type of product that we're stuck in for a bit, and that's part of why we're locked in. We also don't like that. We have lots of complaints, and they seem valid about that product. And you're right, someone's saving a nickel or dime. Those nickel and dimes do add up, so you have to budget if we're going to change to a more expensive product. But we definitely agree it's not the ideal product, and we want to see if we can get something better.
First, I'd like to say something briefly to what I've been hearing people talk about, affordability. I think it's more expensive in Austin because lots of people are moving here, right? It's the market that's driving up our property values. I don't think it's the city that's driving up our property values. It's because people are moving and the market's driving the prices up. But anyway, that leads to my other question, which is actually about the affordability bond. I'm all for doing more to help with the problem of affordability, but what I'm always curious about is how does that get realized? Like if we tax ourselves and we say we put in $300 million into supporting affordability in Austin, what does that end up looking like? Like, do you have an example of how that process works?
Sure, and I'm going to let Kurt give you an example because he's going to remember all the details and all the numbers of an example. But I will say that, the folks that are advocating for the bond, one of the key things in its favor is that it leverages a lot of other money, whether it's private or government money, that then brings additional housing. So sometimes that marginal investment of a few $1 million into, a 300-unit apartment building makes all the difference for being able to make it happen, and to be able to make it happen at levels of affordability that really impact the community. And if you look at the impact statement, I think they were saying it was, leveraging 8 to 1 per dollar, in addition to having, the other economic impact, because there's a host of programs at all different levels of government. But I'm going to let Kurt give an example maybe of the one we just passed last week or something.
Well, and you need to cut me off because I could talk for a while because I'm a wonk on it. But let me say, it's totally agnostic to the should or should not. But the question of how does that work through, I would just point out we have a report that lists all of the projects from the 2018 bond and the earlier bonds. So there's a full report narrative on all of them, and it can look in really different ways. So some of the funds are used for home repair. So you may have a homeowner who's on a fixed income, whose property value has risen, and there's millions that we've spent from the bonds to help someone repair their home and keep it livable so they can stay in it. So that's an example. That's a affordable housing preservation example. Then you have the other types of examples where we're trying to create new affordable housing. And so like was mentioned, we're not usually paying 100%, 80%, 50% of the project. We're usually paying less than 10% of what that project costs. And when we put in our local match, you're drawing down a lot of private equity from private activity bonds or federal funding or state funding. So you're getting projects built that create new housing for parts of the market that the market isn't generally providing on its own without a subsidy, with a marginal investment of a local tax allocation. But obviously for the other tax credits, that's still someone's money, but it's not our local allocation. So generally speaking, those projects come for council approval, and those are competitive projects. So there's a score that goes into it in order to get those state and federal dollars. So we don't just get to sort of willy-nilly give money. It's to match, it's to provide a local match to a project that scores high enough that it's like 4 projects a quarter out of 100. I mean, these are very competitively scored projects that the state is vetting and that they have to meet the federal eligibility. So all in all, it's your choice about whether or not you want to make that type of investment. But if you want to understand how we're using the dollars, there's an extreme amount of vetting that goes into figuring out what we put our money into, and there's a lot of checks and balances in it.
So I think we had at least 3 more people who had questions up, and I'm going to stay and answer those. Ms. Lang does need to leave at 8 to go get a child, so I just want to see if any of those questions were directed at her. Otherwise, I will, okay. So if you want to go ahead, sir, and ask your question, we'll bring the microphone over. Are any of the other questions for Ms. Lang? Okay, then I will thank her after you ask your question.
Hi, Phil Rothblum from Northwest Hills, and it's a pretty quick question. So I'm curious, does the city incur a large amount of debt from previous deficits? And if so, what's the plan to pay that down, and how much interest are we doing on that? So the basic question is, do we have debt?
The city does have debt, and so when you look at the voter-approved bonds that we have, that is debt that we've incurred. And so part of the tax rate is operating and maintenance tax rate, and then there's the debt tax rate. And so when we talk about these bonds that, you know, the current bond that we're discussing as potential going forward for voter approval, the mobility bonds that I mentioned earlier, that is all debt that is that the city pays back as that debt is issued. So when you look at a 5-year spending plan for capital, as we spend those dollars, the debt is issued and the city pays on that debt over a 20-year timeline.
So how much do we have existing debt now? Like, is it hundreds of millions of dollars, or?
Is it on the? Authorized but unissued or total? 1 point.
Regardless, it's here. It's Al Green's.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
That's fine. I'll come over and look at it. Thank you.
And I'll just add that it's not a deficit, so we have to have a balanced budget. It's voter-approved debt, and then our utilities have revenue bond-generated stuff because your rates and stuff, you have to invest in infrastructure, and we spread that out over time. And so some of what you're paying through the rates is the capital expenses. It's always a balanced budget, but we do bond stuff, so we're borrowing, and then we have to pay the others, but there's no deficit. We're not allowed to have a deficit. That gets paid back through the tax revenue, so we set up the bonds so that it gets paid by the revenue that's coming in from the tax dollars each year, if it's that. All right, so I think we're going to say thank you to Ms. Lang and to her staff who are here. And I'm going to take those other couple questions that we have, those other 2 questions that were out there.
And I'm going to hand this out. I just want to explain, because there's 2 sides. So it's this 2-page memo on the bond, but on the back, it lists all of our bonds and the amounts and what they were for and whether they've been issued, et cetera.
Yes, sir, in the back with the mask, and then this gentleman here.
I'm Jeremy Selvage. I'm an apartment renter at Mesa and Spicewood Springs, also in the neighborhood. I wanted to thank you for reminding us all that our unhoused neighbors are people and deserving of not only human dignity, but also a secure place to sleep. And so this might have been a question better addressed to Ms. Lang, but I don't want to keep her from her family obligations. In reviewing the budget, I see that there's $79.1 million earmarked for affordable housing in the budget. And in the section of the budget that discusses those monies, it also discusses efforts to decrease homelessness in our community. I'm wondering, do you have any information that you or your office could share about how those funds are apportioned, or whether there are other funds elsewhere in the budget that go, say, to community partners like ECHO, the Arch, SAFE, other community organizations that partner with the city to address our unhoused neighbors?
So we have, I'm not sure which 79, and if that's the money that was pointed out that was for homelessness services or for affordable housing. But the broader question is that we do partner with a broad group nonprofits and organizations and HACA and Travis County Affordable Housing and Integral Care and, to provide the services. It's not something the city does all on its own. We do provide funding. We also get federal funding. So some of the funding that will be discussed in the budget is what is from general fund revenue. But then we have also funding that's coming, say, from the federal government, a very small portion that is from the state. And so we do have investments in domestic violence and homeless. We have investments, in our schools. We have, programs for workforce, et cetera. So it really depends on what you're interested in finding out. And often we are not the direct provider. We contract with somebody else to deliver the services, and they're bringing in funding from donors or from federal funding on their own, and sometimes we're paying for that with our federal money. We are currently working on a plan to increase the number of housing options that we have for our unhoused so that we can house 3,000 people over the course of 5 years through a plan that we're calling the Summit. And we devoted a considerable portion of the ARPA money that we got. Travis County also did, and we have some existing sources that are going through there in HACA, and we are currently trying to raise the last portion of the $100 million that we need for that from the private sector, and the hope is that they will do that. So we've made a lot of investments. I'm not going to say that all of those investments have been perfect or that we couldn't be doing some things better, but there are certainly a lot of investments that we are making. Yes, sir, you've been waiting really patiently. Wait for the microphone.
And let me just say, if you want more information or if anyone wants more information about something, my cards are on the desk, so feel free to contact us if you want more specifics.
And I'm pretty sure there's like a page in the budget about homelessness.
Yeah, I don't remember the 79 figure. That's why we might want to follow up.
Well, first of all, you're the first public official I've talked to who says that nickels and dimes add up to some big money eventually. Leverage is probably responsible for most of the great financial debacles of this century. But in this case, it's not as sexy as property taxes, but I go to most of the city council meetings. I think you've seen me there. Mm-hmm. I watch, here's $880,000 for lawyers for illegal immigrants. Here's $104,000 for the Barton Springs Bathhouse mural. The library took a $300,000 hit by suspending fines. No more fines because that's racist. I've been checking books out of libraries since 1950. I always brought them back and paid. I never paid a fine. But you add up $300,000 or $400,000 a week. Each council meeting, I see a mural or I see a bathhouse or I see something, and pretty soon you get to a pretty serious number. And if you concentrate more on what you're spending and what you're taking in, and when you take you can't take $300,000 out of any business in this town without seeing an impact. But you took it out of the library. So that's how you got where you are today, and there is no provision for any slowdown in the economy in your projections. It's going to be like this. It's going to be like this forever.
There actually are. There's not a recession built in, but they're pretty conservative on the sales tax as you move away from this fiscal year, and pretty much every year there's an extra bit of sales tax. They're under doing that in terms of the other pieces on that. So I think we did have. Okay.
Thanks, Don Brown in Northwest Hills also, and I appreciate your comments on the police response. It surprised me when you did your priorities that was not at the top of your priorities along with affordable housing, because as I talk to people in my precinct, that is on the top of their list, without a doubt, and along with homelessness and what's happening in our city. So those are two things. The other thing I'd like to know is climate change did make it, but do we have any idea how much of a premium we are paying as a city for electric vehicles and all the other green actions? And at least we ought to know what we're paying for climate change in the city. It's our money, so we should know what that is. So has there ever been any assessment on how much we spend as a premium on that?
Well, I actually had a budget writer last year that said they had to tell us what they were spending money on for climate change. So if you look in the budget documents, there is a document that goes through that. I don't know if it's framed in the way that you're framing it, but what we're finding is that our investments in renewable energy are financially smart. They're saving us money, for example. One of the challenges we have with the rate case is that it costs money to provide the infrastructure just for you to check into the system and get electricity. And the rate case, as Austin Energy would tell it, is that it's about, rejiggering things so that you're paying some more of the fixed costs. And if you are using a lot more energy, you're going to pay more for that. And one of the things we have to figure out is we've actually done a pretty good job of getting people to conserve energy. And we have to rejigger our model for our utilities so that we can provide energy, as we move forward. And shifting people onto electric vehicles is not only good for the environment, it is economically good for our utility to stay afloat because we have to have the usage as part of the model. And so it is part of, it's part of multiple things in terms of things that we might need to make sure that we're doing as a city. I'm not sure it's a study at the level that I wanted or the level you wanted, but it was a first effort to actually be more transparent about it. But you can certainly, there's a lot of information. I'm on the Austin Energy Oversight Committee, as are my colleagues. There's a lot of information that we have, that's buried in there about the costs and what's coming up and how much energy we do have. So I think we're going to wrap up the.
Well, if I could just add, and part of the climate investments, it's making sure we're hardened and can respond to the stressors, right? So it's infrastructure because we're seeing increased flooding. It's the wildfire mitigation because we're seeing that enhanced risk with drought. So some of it is, they're very real investments because the impacts are here. They're not sort of, willy-nilly investments.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to build our resilience as a community, and that's absolutely something that we learned that we need to do and that we need to do a better job over the last couple of years. Thank you all for coming out and engaging in the conversation. I will stay around for a little bit, as will my staff. I'm sure that Chief Fluckritz, who is here, would be happy to speak with you for a few minutes. I don't want to impose on his evening, but I think that's why he's here. Thank you all for being here. It is easier for me to represent you when I hear from you, and I appreciate you being here. And I'll just underscore something that Kurt added during the process. Please be in touch with us. If something's going on Nextdoor, don't assume that we know about it. We actually can't see Nextdoor. We can only post our things on it unless it's like where I live, and I don't frankly have time to be on Nextdoor much. And it's not usually very helpful to us because it's not specific enough. It doesn't give us enough information. We can't connect somebody with what they need. It's much easier for us to take a specific problem, like when Linda's neighborhood called about that issue and we knew it was in the WUI, we could take action working, with the property owner, et cetera. But we have no chance of doing that if we're not brought in. And we'll do the best that we can to do that. There are competing issues and whatever, and we will do our best to try, particularly when you have a particular problem that needs to be solved. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for being engaged. Hope to see some of you at our office hours next week. Thank you.
And go ahead. And I'm going to add, because you saw us list our Facebook and Twitter, we use that to try to keep you updated. But when you want to contact us, send us an email. We don't sit at our computers on Twitter and Facebook. We log in and use it to post something. So send us an email to share a problem or ask a question. Thank you.
Since she left me the whiskey, takes me to the rodeo ground.
Thank you for coming.
candy.